My racist family forced me and my wife to attend a family gathering, just so they could frame me for murder, not knowing that the fate of their lives would be placed in the palm of my hand because of it. From the second I started dating my beautiful wife, our families hated each other. You see, she was practically the embodiment of the American dream. All-white family, 5-bedroom house, a golden Labrador. So when she started dating me, a Mexican raised by a dirt-poor family who worked his way up, they weren't too happy to say the least. But my wife meant everything to me, so I was determined to woo them. And after years of sending thousands of dollars of gifts for their nieces and nephews, baskets of flowers, and paying for their online subscription fees, they finally decided they were somewhat okay with me marrying their daughter. Meanwhile, my family refused to stop referring to her as gringa. To avoid conflict, I tried to decline invites to as many family events as possible. But one day, during a summer cookout at my parents' place, my mom kept guilt-tripping me, so for once, me and my wife actually showed up. But as soon as we arrived, I wanted the ground to swallow us up whole. We arrived at 12:03, just 3 minutes late, and immediately we were getting dirty looks. My sisters, Georgina and Camilla, came up to us and said, "We thought a cracker like you was too good to show up to our cookout." My wife looked like she was about to cry, and I basically told them to F off. Their husbands, Pedro and Juan, just rolled their eyes, and if not for the kids, I would have slapped them right there and then. So instead, we grabbed some frozen margaritas and tried to drink our way to happiness. That's when Dad waved from his hot tub sanctuary. "Hey, smart move, son. Get that good white girl kitty with no bun in the oven." I looked over at my wife, and I could tell she was doing that thing she does where she pretends to not care, when really she's on the verge of crying their eyes out. But before I could react, Georgina chimed in. "Some of us actually want to continue the family legacy, Dad." Suddenly, passive-aggressive comments about how selfish we were started flying at us. I grabbed my wife's hand to leave, but she was adamant on staying. And you know the saying, happy wife, happy life? Well, I pretty much lived by that. So unfortunately, we stayed. And about 45 minutes later, two of the kids, Georgina's oldest boy Diogo and Camila's daughter Renata, started running around the pool trying to shove people in. And by this point, me and my wife were pretty intoxicated, so we just sat by the sunbeds. But before I knew it, they were making their way towards this white woman in her 60s. She was standing dangerously close to the pool, and when the kids finally grabbed her, she stumbled, but she didn't completely fall, and mainly just got partially soaked up to her knees. After she left, my family immediately burst into laughter. "Did you see her ugly cracker face?" Pedro guffawed, nearly spilling his beer onto his fat belly, and laughed. I was genuinely disgusted, and an awful gut feeling washed over me. But still, my wife swore that she was bonding well with my family, and somehow convinced me to stay. But then just a few minutes later, everything changed, and I tried to murder my nephews and nieces. At least, that's what my family wants to believe. You see, out of nowhere as I stood beside the pool chatting up a storm, I noticed 3 kids charging full speed toward me from my peripheral vision. Obviously, I was their next target. I simply sidestepped at the last second, and all 3 kids ran straight into the pool at full speed with startled shrieks. Most guests, including my wife and I, laughed at the backfired prank, but my wasted sisters completely lost it. Georgina jumped up so fast her margarita splashed across the patio. "Diogo! Diogo!" she screamed, running to the edge of the pool where her son was flailing and splashing water everywhere. Camilla was right behind her. "Renata can't swim. Oh my gosh, Renata!" Apparently, 2 of the kids couldn't even swim, despite wearing swimsuits at a pool party with water activities planned. Since I wasn't dressed for swimming, I stepped back and let others fish the kids out. Pedro and Juan, who had been laughing uproariously just moments before, now dove into action, splashing into the pool fully clothed. The children were wailing dramatically like they'd been mortally wounded, even though they'd only been in the water for seconds. And in just a few seconds, all hell broke loose. The 4 drunk parents started screaming at everyone, especially me, for almost letting their kids drown. They were also furious because 2 kids had been filming the prank with their parents' iPhones, which were now at the bottom of the pool. One brother-in-law tried retrieving the phones, but his size and intoxication level made that impossible. Nobody else volunteered to help, given my sisters were still berating everyone. "You could have killed my son!" Georgina shrieked at me, mascara running down her face. "You saw them coming and you just moved out of the way? What kind of monster does that?" Camilla added, wrapping a towel around Renata, who was sobbing theatrically. "These are children." I felt my blood pressure rising. They were trying to push me in the pool. I was wearing street clothes and had my phone in my pocket. "So what?" Pedro bellowed, his face now purple with rage. "It's just a phone. These are kids." I told my sisters it was their responsibility to watch their kids, not mine. If anything had happened, it would have been on them. "Maybe teach your kids not to assault adults at parties," I added, which was admittedly not helpful to the already volatile situation. "Assault?" Juan scoffed, swaying slightly as he struggled to maintain his balance. "It's a goddamn pool party, and they're just having fun," Camilla added, hugging her daughter close. "You have no idea what it's like to raise children." "Thank God for that," Lauren muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. Harsh words were exchanged. My wife and I left after my other brother-in-law face-planted while screaming at us. Juan had been getting increasingly in my face, jabbing his finger at my chest, when he suddenly lurched forward and smashed directly into the concrete. Blood immediately started pooling under his face. "We're done here," I said to Lauren, who was already collecting our things. "Now they're claiming I should have just let their kids push me in and have their fun, ruining my phone in the process." Of course, my dad never left his hot tub sanctuary during any of this. When we walked past him on our way out, he just raised his eyebrows and took another sip of beer. "See you at Christmas?" he asked with a wry smile. "Not if they're coming," I replied, nodding toward the chaos behind us. First update, 1 month later. Turns out my nieces and nephews are actually decent swimmers according to my parents, who say they use the pool regularly. The 7-year-old is still learning but loves the water. My sister just claimed they couldn't swim to make me look bad. To clarify, it was the 2 10-year-olds and the 9-year-old who tried pushing me in. "They've been swimming here all summer," my dad told me during a phone call last week, his tone matter-of-fact. "Georgina and Camilla were just being dramatic. Diogo's on the swim team for crying out loud." After we left, the party ended badly. My drunk brother-in-law who face-planted needed stitches at urgent care. Dad had to drive him since he was too wasted, which Dad was not happy about. "Had to sit in that waiting room for 3 hours," he grumbled. Juan kept trying to hit on the nurse while Camilla was alternating between crying and yelling at him. It was a nightmare. I'm too old for this nonsense. That evening, my sister started a nasty group text that included our parents, with their husbands adding their 2 cents. The messages were vicious, calling me and Lauren selfish child haters, and the reason this family is falling apart. There were even some comments about how I always thought I was better than everyone since college. My wife and I blocked all 4 of them. Mom called me upset about the horrible things they'd said. "I've never seen them like this," she said, her voice trembling. "Some of the things they wrote about you and Lauren, I just don't understand why they're so angry." My parents demanded my sisters and brothers-in-law come over the next day, without kids, for a serious discussion about ground rules, Mom's words. According to my dad, it was a tense 2 hours with a lot of deflection and blame shifting. This resulted in a half-hearted apology via my mom's phone. "We all got carried away. Sorry things got out of hand." My wife's death glare kept me from saying saying what I really thought. I just said thanks and left it at that. That's it? Lauren had asked afterward, her arms crossed tightly. They try to humiliate us, blame us for their bad parenting, and all you say is thanks. What else could I say with my mom standing there looking so hopeful? I replied. It's easier this way. Thinking things were settled, I unblocked them. That night, one brother-in-law texted demanding I pay for their ruined phones. You caused this. 2 iPhones, $2,200. Venmo me by Friday. I replied, never. Screenshot the message. Sent it to my parents with a note saying we were going no contact and not to invite us to anything if they'd be there. Then blocked them all again. All hell broke loose again. Dad called them and absolutely tore into them. He later told me he'd finally had enough of their entitled bullshit. I told them they were acting like spoiled teenagers, he recounted, sounding energized in a way I hadn't heard in years. I said if they couldn't act like adults, they could forget about using any of our stuff. He banned the grandkids from their house indefinitely, affecting my mom's regular babysitting service, and banned my sisters from using the mountain vacation house, revealing that my wife and I actually own it, not my parents. This revelation shocked my sisters since they frequently use that cabin, including hosting their friends for weekend getaways. I never wanted them to know we owned it. We bought it for my parents who always wanted a mountain retreat. It was meant to be a private gift, allowing them to enjoy retirement without financial strain. Keeping my ownership quiet was to avoid exactly this kind of drama. I shouldn't have mentioned the cabin, Dad admitted later, sounding a bit regretful. But they were being so entitled about everything. Georgina actually said, well, we'll just use the mountain house instead of coming here. That's when I lost it. Second update, another month later. It's been less than a month of no contact, but it's amazing how much more peaceful our lives are without their constant drama. I hadn't realized how much ongoing low-level toxicity they created. The random text messages criticizing our life choices, the snide remarks at family gatherings, the constant one-upmanship. Lauren pointed out that I'd been checking my phone less anxiously and actually sleeping better. You don't tense up every time your phone buzzes now, she observed over breakfast one morning, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I've noticed you're more relaxed. Personally, I don't mind them using the vacation property. We bought it for my parents, and they control who uses it, though we cover all operating costs and taxes. My parents had always dreamed of a place in the mountains, but could never afford it. When Lauren and I found ourselves in a position to help, we jumped at the chance. It's not about the money, I explained to Lauren when we first discussed the purchase. It's about giving them something they've always wanted but denied themselves while raising us. One positive from this blow-up is knowing what to do with the property when my parents get older. We'll just sell it rather than managing it for the family. I'd previously worried about how to handle it long-term, especially with my sister's expectations. My dad changed the lock code last week so only he, Mom, my wife, and I have access. Had to be done, he said matter-of-factly. They kept showing up unannounced, leaving messes, not restocking what they used. Mom says she's now visiting each sister's home separately to spend time with the grandkids because all 5 together stress her out. The kids are actually better behaved when they're not competing for attention, she told me, sounding relieved. And I can actually enjoy them this way. My parents told me they don't plan on having my sister's families back to their house anytime soon and are enjoying the quiet. Your father actually sat and read a book on the patio yesterday, Mom shared, sounding somewhat amazed. First time in years he's done that. I suspect my parents were already tired of the old dynamic and used this pool incident as an excuse to restructure their relationships. They seem lighter somehow, less burdened. Dad's even talking about taking Mom on a road trip, something they haven't done since before we were born. Third update, 2 more weeks later. I need to provide some financial context. My parents aren't good with money. I've done their taxes for years, so I know their situation. Their house is paid for with minimal debt, but they didn't save much for retirement. They get Social Security, Dad has a pension, and they have modest savings. I bought their current car as a retirement gift, their first non-leased vehicle in 20 years. We just never seemed to get ahead, Dad confessed to me once, his eyes downcast. Every time we started saving, something would come up with one of the girls or the house. My sisters believe our parents are wealthy and will leave them everything since I don't need more money, so they've never bothered saving either. This misconception stems from my parents' tendency to finance things they couldn't afford, like new cars every few years, rather than admitting they were struggling. It turns out my oldest sister Georgina and her husband Pedro, with 3 kids, have been living beyond their means. They've maxed out credit cards and are behind on car lease payments. One vehicle is about to be repossessed. The husband had bragged about making good money, but it's actually half what he claimed. They live in a McMansion with a swimming pool, belong to a country club they can't afford, and constantly post vacation photos on social media. She confessed to Mom they need a loan because, here's the bombshell, for the past 3 years, instead of just staying at our vacation house, she's been renting it out monthly and pocketing $2,000 plus per weekend, or $4,000 plus per week. Now that she's cut off from using the place, she's had to cancel bookings and fears financial ruin. She was listing it on multiple rental sites, Mom told me, sounding utterly defeated. Using your father's and my photos from our trips there. She showed me the accounts on her phone, crying about all the money she's losing now. My parents can't afford to loan them money. My other sister Camila knew about this rental scheme and never said anything. I suspect she did the same thing. Once when I visited unexpectedly, I found strangers claiming they were staying there with my sister's family who had gone to town. Looking back, that encounter makes much more sense now. They had all the information about local restaurants and hiking trails, I recalled to Lauren. Camila must have had some kind of welcome packet for them. My parents warned me my sisters would approach me next. They think you're made of money, Dad said warily. Just be prepared. Sure enough, they ambushed me outside my home Thursday, waiting until I returned from work. I had to choose between fighting in public, letting them cause a scene, or inviting them in. I chose the latter. We need to talk, Georgina said as I pulled into my driveway. She and Camila were standing by their cars, arms crossed defensively. Family meeting. Once inside, they fed me a bullshit story about needing the mountain house again immediately. Georgina did most of the talking, with Camila nodding supportively. The kids miss having our family gatherings there, Georgina said, voice dripping with false sentiment. It's where we bond as a family. Then they shifted to what was clearly their main agenda, money. They claimed I should step up and pay for their kids' college since I'm a shitty brother, and that's what family does. You and Lauren have more than you need, Camila added, leaning forward intently. Meanwhile, we're struggling to give our children the opportunities they deserve. I let them finish, then called them out with what my parents had told me. So this isn't about family bonding, is it? I asked calmly. It's about the thousands of dollars you've been making by illegally renting out property you don't own. Things exploded. Denial, crying, cursing, screaming, the works. Georgina jumped up and started pacing, alternating between attacking me and justifying herself. You have no idea what it's like raising kids these days, she shouted, her voice rising to a pitch that made my ears hurt. Everything costs a fortune. Travel teams, private lessons, the right schools. We're just trying to give them the best. Camila tried a different approach, going for guilt. If you cared about your nieces and nephews at all, you want to help them. What kind of uncle are you? I said some harsh truths, including that their financial problems weren't my responsibility. You've been committing fraud, I told them bluntly. You could be criminally liable for the income you didn't report, not to mention the unauthorized use of someone else's property for profit. They finally left after an hour of back and forth. Afterward, I showered and collapsed. When my wife got home, she told me she'd had to block more new numbers because my sisters were bombarding our phones. Georgina left me a voicemail crying about how I've turned you against them, Lauren said, deleting messages. Camila texted saying we're heartless and selfish. The next day, I drove to the vacation house and padlocked the the entrance gate. I'm the only one with the key. I also walked the property to make sure nothing had been damaged or removed. Everything looked okay, though there were signs of recent use. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel, a forgotten pool float on the deck. Fourth update, another month later. My parents handed responsibility for the vacation home to me, saying they're done managing it after my sisters pressured them to allow access again. This disappoints me, because the place was meant for them to enjoy, and I've never minded them letting my sisters use it. We're tired of being in the middle, Mom explained over coffee at their house, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. Your father's blood pressure is up, and the doctor says he needs to reduce stress. Dad was more blunt. I'm too old for this drama. If they want to fight about it, they can fight with you directly. I've secured the property, locked the gate with a heavy-duty chain and premium lock, reset all door keypads with new codes, installed security cameras, including one with a beautiful valley view, put up video monitoring signs, and installed a lockout for the water shutoff valve. My property manager, David, helped with all of this. He's a retired sheriff's deputy who lives nearby and keeps an eye on several vacation properties in the area. If anyone tries to access without authorization, I'll know immediately, he assured me, demonstrating the app on his phone. The cameras all feed to my phone and yours. Both brothers-in-law called my office last week. The older one, Pedro, was furious after being locked out during a planned guys' weekend. He threatened to rip that gate out of the goddamn ground and admitted they'd been renting to a few friends for income. He demanded I refund their guests' money. Absolutely not. The younger one, Juan, seemed less invested in the fight. Look, Juan had said toward the end of our conversation, I get you're mad, but this whole thing has gotten out of hand. Camilla is crying constantly, and the kids don't understand why they can't go to the mountain house anymore. That's a parenting issue for you to handle, I replied coolly. I'm considering selling the vacation home. My wife and I won't use it enough to justify keeping it, and family gatherings there seem unlikely. I mentioned this to my parents, and they basically said, whatever. I could double my investment, as it's 3 lots with amazing views at the end of a private road. But I'll wait. Selling now would be an emotional decision. Maybe we should rent it out ourselves, Lauren suggested one evening as we reviewed the property photos. At least that way it would pay for itself, and your parents could still use it whenever they want. My sisters and I aren't speaking, and I have no plans to initiate contact. I spent an evening with my parents last week at a new restaurant. No one mentioned the drama, though Mom updated us on the kids. She's spending time with them at their homes. Diogo made the travel soccer team, she shared, showing us pictures on her phone, and Renata won a science fair ribbon. It was nice to hear about the kids without the usual tension. I've always liked my nieces and nephews when they're not being influenced by their parents' behavior. They're just kids after all. Fifth update, another month later. My parents told me my sisters were pressuring them to demand I open the vacation house for Thanksgiving, which had become a family tradition, though my wife and I only attended once in 7 years. They usually have around 25 people, including some of my sister's in-laws. They won't stop calling about it, Mom sighed during our weekly phone check-in. They say the kids are heartbroken about missing the tradition. My dad refused to bother me about it, and instead proposed they rent an Airbnb in the mountains, if everyone split the cost in advance. I told them, put up or shut up, he recounted with satisfaction. If they want a mountain Thanksgiving so badly, they can pay for it. Otherwise, Thanksgiving would be at their house or one of my sisters. This caused a fight between my sisters. The middle one supported the Airbnb plan, but the oldest has no money. The deadline passed, so Thanksgiving will be at my parents', but we won't attend. We're going to Lauren's parents this year, I explained to my mom. It's been planned for months. This wasn't entirely true. We made arrangements only after hearing about the Thanksgiving drama, but it seemed kinder than telling her we were avoiding the family. My parents asked me not to sell the property for now. They'd like to use it occasionally once my sisters accept the new normal. Dad mentioned wanting to spend a week there fishing in the spring. They probably hope everyone can gather there again someday, but that's not happening. I'd prefer selling, but we'll keep it if my parents use it. Plus, it will appreciate further. The real estate market in that area is going crazy, my agent friend Kevin told me over lunch. If you can hold on to it for another year or two, you might see another 20% increase in value. My sisters continue calling from new numbers, leaving messages demanding we meet, for our parents' sake, to discuss the family vacation home. They've called my wife too. I don't know if they're delusional or think they can bully me into giving access again. Your mother is heartbroken, Georgina claimed in one voicemail. All she wants is for her family to be together for the holidays. Camilla took a different approach in her messages. The kids keep asking why Uncle doesn't love them anymore. Is that what you want? To hurt innocent children? According to my parents, my oldest sister and her husband are getting out of their vehicle leases and selling their jet skis and other luxury items. This will be particularly hard on my sister who loves showing off, and her husband, whose identity is tied to his truck. He even has the truck brand's logo tattooed on him. Pedro's been telling everyone it's a temporary thing while they're between investment opportunities, Dad said with a snort. But the country club membership is gone too. Your mother ran into Georgina at Costco instead of that fancy grocery store she usually shops at. I feel bad for their kids, who are innocent in all this, but not bad enough to bail out my sisters from problems they created themselves. Sixth update, post-Thanksgiving. Things have gone completely to hell. My brothers-in-law broke into my vacation home and were arrested. They've been charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats. All Class 1 misdemeanors. I've refused to drop charges unless they pay for all damages. The day after Thanksgiving, they used an angle grinder to cut through the driveway gate chain, damaging the gate. Lauren and I were enjoying a peaceful Thanksgiving dinner with her parents when David called. Your security cameras just picked up 2 men cutting through the gate chain, he said tensely. I'm heading over now and have called the sheriff. My brothers-in-law ruined the front door's lock set trying to get in, finally accessing through the utility floor door and a locked internal door. They also broke into the barn for unknown reasons, possibly looking for tools or just out of spite. When they exited through the front door, they were met by sheriff's deputies and my property manager, David. David received camera alerts, saw what was happening, and called the sheriff. The brothers-in-law tried lying their way out, but the deputies didn't buy it. They claimed you had given them permission to use the property, David told me later, but the deputies could see the broken locks and cut chain. Plus, they'd been drinking and weren't making much sense. When arrested, they threatened to beat the hell out of me in front of the officers. One of them, Pedro, according to the report, specifically said, when I get out of here, I'm going to find that little bastard and beat him until he can't walk. Since my wife and I were unreachable, spending the day with her parents, David and the sheriff booked them on all possible charges. My sisters freaked out, called my parents, tried calling me, still blocked, and searched for a lawyer to arrange bail. Difficult in a rural area during a holiday weekend. My older sister has no cash and maxed out cards, so my middle sister would have had to bail out both husbands. When we finally checked our phones that evening, we found dozens of messages. I called David to get details and assess the damage, then called the sheriff's department to confirm I wanted to press charges. Yes, I absolutely want to pursue this, I told the deputy on duty. They've been warned repeatedly to stay away from the property. When I finally called my parents Saturday afternoon, they were distraught. My mom answered the phone in tears. Why is this happening to our family? She wept. How did we get here? My sisters had pressured them to convince me to drop charges. I flatly refused, saying I wouldn't consider it until consulting an attorney and being fully reimbursed for repairs. My mom was crying by the end of our call, which made me feel terrible. I know you're upset, Mom, I tried explaining, but this has gone beyond family disagreements. They committed actual crimes. They're family, she repeated, as if that excused everything. We need to work this out between ourselves. My dad got on the phone then. Your mother's upset, but I understand where you're coming from, he said quietly. This whole thing's out of control. I haven't visited the property yet. Seeing the damage in person would just infuriate me more. I've contacted attorney friends for referrals to pursue restraining orders and potentially sue my sisters for the rental income they collected. My wife is completely done with all of this. She told me it's my decision how to handle it, but thinks they need a harsh lesson. We've tried being reasonable, she pointed out as we discussed our options. We've tried ignoring them. Nothing works because they feel entitled to what's ours. You're right, I agreed, exhausted by the whole situation. Enough is enough. 7th update, 5 days later. Thursday afternoon, I received a courier-delivered envelope at my office containing a signed letter from both brothers-in-law and a $5,000 cashier's check. The letter contained what seemed like a sincere apology, acknowledging their wrongdoing and offering to pay for all damages. They also promised to stay away from the vacation home unless specifically invited and asked me to help get the charges dropped as they could lose their jobs. We acted impulsively and irresponsibly, the letter stated. Our behavior was inexcusable, and we deeply regret the damage we caused, both to your property and to our family relationships. We understand if you cannot forgive us, but we hope you will accept this payment for repairs and consider helping us avoid the severe professional consequences we now face. This complete 180 degrees was shocking. I'd already scheduled an appointment with an attorney about suing them and getting a restraining order. I called and got an earlier meeting where he recommended we pursue a settlement and mutual release agreement with all 4 of them instead of a lawsuit. He's drafting it now. This approach will give you legally binding protection while avoiding a drawn-out court battle, the attorney Robert explained. The agreement will include non-contact provisions, financial restitution, and consequences for any violations. My property manager estimates repairs will cost around $4,000, mostly for the front door. They really did a number on that custom door, David reported, but the gate can be repaired rather than replaced, which saves some money. My attorney contacted both brothers-in-law, who agreed to the settlement. The middle one admitted they could afford either damages or a lawyer, not both, and that their primary concern was getting charges dropped. Juan was quite forthcoming, Robert told me. He said Pedro F. was the instigator, but they both knew it was wrong. He also mentioned your sisters have been relentless about getting back what's theirs, as they see it. My attorney believes the prosecutor will likely dismiss charges since they're paying for damages and have no prior record. However, I might need to appear in person to request dismissal. This isn't perfect, but it should resolve the legal and financial aspects of this nightmare. I doubt I'll ever have a civil relationship with any of them again, which is fine. What I want most is closure, so I can move on and never speak to them again. My wife feels the same way. I just want our peaceful life back, Lauren said as we discussed the settlement. No more emergency calls, no more anxiety every time the phone rings. Me too, I agreed. This needs to end. Final update, 5 days later. Tuesday. I reviewed the settlement agreement with my attorney, made minor changes, and he sent it to my sisters and brothers-in-law. It included them paying my legal fees, about $3,000, which they tried to negotiate away. They argued that legal fees weren't part of the property damage, Robert told me afterward. I explained this wasn't a negotiation. It was their only alternative to criminal prosecution and civil litigation. My attorney told them to accept it as written or face lawsuits for the rental income, property damage, emotional distress, lost income from dealing with this, plus attorney fees. He also warned I'd push the DA to prosecute every charge. They signed. Reportedly, the meeting was tense. At one point, the middle brother-in-law told both my sisters to shut the hell up, or he'd make his own deal and leave them to fend for themselves. They provided another $2,500 cashier's check, claiming that's all they had left. Juan was surprisingly the voice of reason, Robert recounted. When your sister started protesting about the no-contact provision, he finally lost patience. He told them they were lucky you weren't pressing for jail time. Yesterday, I visited the vacation house to see the damage and meet with the DA's office. The senseless destruction made me furious. I nearly abandoned the settlement to ruin their lives instead. The beautiful custom front door my parents had loved so much was splintered around the lock. The gate had deep gouges from the angle grinder. Inside, they left empty beer bottles and dirty boot prints across the floors. After venting to a friend for an hour, I managed to calm down enough to continue. They're not worth throwing away your own peace of mind, my friend reminded me. Get this settled and move on. The assistant DA agreed to drop all charges except trespassing, reduced to a Class 2 misdemeanor, since I wasn't pursuing prosecution and they'd paid for damages. The brothers-in-law must plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge sets. I was told if they fight this charge or cause any more trouble in that county, things would go very badly for them. The judge here doesn't look kindly on property damage, the ADA informed me. If they step one toe out of line, we'll revisit the original charges. The settlement includes a no-contact clause. If any of us end up in the same place, whoever arrived last must leave immediately. They get to keep whatever they made from renting the vacation house, my concession, unless I face tax consequences, which would be their responsibility. If the IRS comes knocking because of rental income reported on my property, they'll have to cover any penalties or additional taxes, I specified to Robert, who added the provision. My wife and I will sign today. This is likely my final update on this mess. The family dynamics are permanently altered, but I had to do what was best for my wife and me. This agreement basically formalizes the no-contact arrangement we've had for months. It's not what my parents wanted, but I'm satisfied with it. Your father and I still hope someday, my mother began during our last phone call. I know, Mom, I interrupted gently. But right now, this is the best solution for everyone. As Lauren and I signed the final documents in Robert's office, I felt a weight lifting. Ready to put this behind us? She asked, squeezing my hand. More than ready, I replied, signing the last page. Let's go home. Looking back on this saga, I can't help but reflect on how quickly family relationships can unravel when entitlement, greed, and poor communication collide. The mountain house that was meant to be a peaceful retreat for my parents became the epicenter of a family civil war. 3 months ago, I never would have imagined my brothers-in-law would be facing criminal charges or that I'd need a legal agreement to keep my own sisters away from me. The drive home from Robert's office was quiet, with both Lauren and I lost in our thoughts. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began, droplets streaming down the windshield like tears. Do you think we'll ever reconcile with them? Lauren asked, breaking the silence. I considered this for a moment. Maybe someday, but not until they truly understand what they did wrong. And honestly, I'm not sure they're capable of that level of self-reflection. She nodded, reaching over to take my hand. I'm proud of you, you know. You stood your ground when it would have been easier to cave. That evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Fishing trip in April? Just us men. Could use some quiet time on that beautiful lake. I smiled and replied, absolutely. I'll mark my calendar. Perhaps this wasn't the ending I'd expected when we bought that mountain retreat, but maybe it was the one we needed. The property that had become a source of such contention would now serve its original purpose, providing peace and relaxation for those who truly appreciated it. My parents have started making their own plans for the future, less encumbered by my sister's constant demands. Mom's thinking about joining a book club, and Dad's talking about volunteering at the local fishing club to teach kids. They're rediscovering themselves in their retirement, which is something I never anticipated but I'm grateful to witness. As for my nieces and nephews, I hope someday they'll understand. Perhaps when they're older, we can build relationships independent of their parents. Children shouldn't have to pay for their parents' mistakes. For now, though, Lauren and I are focusing on our own lives. We've decided to take that European vacation we've been postponing for years. Life is too short to waste on drama and toxicity. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the one you're born into. And that mountain house? It will remain a sanctuary, not a battleground. Whether we eventually sell it or keep it in the family, one thing is certain. It will never again be used by people who don't respect or appreciate it. Hey, Lauren said, interrupting my thoughts. What do you think about inviting your parents to join us in Italy next fall? I think they love Tuscany. I smiled at my wife, amazed at her generous spirit even after everything we've been through. That's a brilliant idea. Dad would go crazy for the wine tours. As the last light faded from the sky, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. This chapter was closing, and a new one beginning. Whatever came next, we would face it together, boundaries intact, and with the knowledge that sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary ones.